it may be known, but it's worth starting with the story of Airbnb.
Yeah.
How did you get the idea?
Yeah.
What were the early days like?
Right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Many people would say that, or a number of people said it's the worst idea that ever worked. Or at least I can say everyone at the time seemed to say it was the worst idea ever, and it worked. So maybe that's the nice connection. It's the worst idea that ever worked. Growing up, I never really thought about being an entrepreneur. I didn't even know that existed. I don't even know if I ever heard the word entrepreneur. That would have been an almost absurd thing to say in upstate New York, where I grew up, to use that word. In fact, in hindsight, the only entrepreneur I knew was Bob from Bob's Pizza. And I didn't really want to have a pizza shop, so I don't think it would have occurred to me to start a company. My parents are both social workers. My mom used to have a joke. She said, I chose a job for the love, and I made no money, so she choose a job for the money. And I said, well, I'm going to art school. And she said, oh, my God. You chose the only path in life that's going to pay less than a social worker because you're going to be at arts and get paid nothing. And so she said, if you do that, make sure you don't move back home, live in my basement, make sure that you get a job one day, and that if you get that job, that make sure that job has health insurance. And this is like a grand ambition for my parents. So it wasn't about starting any kind of big company or scaling up a company. And so I wasn't going to be able to call my parents, oh my God, what do I do? I have 100 employees. How do I scale? That wasn't going to happen in my family. I ended up going to RISD. And the school had a profound impact on me, probably much like here in Stanford, because one other thing happened at RISD. I met my co-founder, one of my co-founders at RISD named Joe Gebbia. And one day Joe says, Brian, I think one day we're going to start a company together. Well, I'm living in LA, working as an industrial designer. And I remember my life, and you may be confronted these decisions, where everything in front of me in my life looks like everything behind me. In other words, the road is like a disappearing road into the horizon. And it kind of terrified me because it was that job with health insurance. And at RISD, I was told, no, I can do anything. I can change the world, and you're not doing that. And so I had this impulsive moment where I go into work, and my roommate, or my friend Joe at RISD, was trying to convince me to leave my company and go to San Francisco, and we were going to start a company. We had no idea what this company was going to be. We just thought, we'll think of the big idea. And so one day, I go to work, I quit my job, and living in a house with a bunch of friends that moved across the country with me. And I say, okay, guys, I'm going to leave. And they thought I had like an early life crisis. They thought like they need to have an intervention. I'm like, no, I'm fine. And I took some old foam mattress. I rolled it up in the backseat of an old Honda Civic. And with $1,000 at the bank, I drive up to San Francisco. This is October 2007. I get to San Francisco, and Joe tells me the rent is $1,150. I didn't have enough money for rent. That weekend, this international design conference was coming to San Francisco. We went to this conference website, and we noticed on the conference website they had like a hotels tab. We clicked on the hotels tab. And in the hotels tab, there are always hotels. And next to every hotel said sold out, sold out, sold out. And at that point, we just had this idea. We said, well, designers need a place to stay. We literally had just airbeds. And so we ended up hosting 3 people from around the world, a 35-year-old woman from Boston, a 45-year-old father of 5 from Utah, and a 30-year-old from India. And now, I got to tell you, the reason we started doing this is because we thought it was funny, cool, and we make money, because we had to make rent. There's something that happens, though. When somebody lives with you, it's kind of like the arc of a friendship gets contracted from a year to a day. In other words, if you were to meet somebody, maybe here at Stanford or in the real world, and you get to know them, how much time does it take to invite them over to your house and have dinner with them? It might take months, even a year. You don't just get to know people. And what it did, we realized, is it contracted this year-long friendship into a couple days. And so these people came as strangers. They literally left as friends. We ended up keeping in touch with them. In fact, one of the guests ended up inviting me to his wedding. The other guest, this woman, moves from Boston to San Francisco. And I think we're realizing there's a bigger idea here. I asked Joe, I said, who's the best engineer you know? Because Joe and I were designers. Joe could do front-end design, engineering, but we were both designers and product people. And Joe said, well, my old roommate Nate is. Nate, Joe met on Craigslist. He went to Harvard. He's a computer scientist. And so the 3 of us got together and we basically had this core idea. We said, what if you could book someone's home the way you could book a hotel anywhere in the world? And that's basically how it started. The one caveat I'll make to the story is, after that very first weekend, there wasn't this flash that, oh my God, this is going to be huge. We actually didn't do anything for 4 months. In fact, the thing we don't usually talk about is after that, we started exploring creating a roommate matching website. Because we thought no one would ever do this air bed and breakfast thing, but people need roommates. And we thought roommates meets Craigslist meets Facebook, like roommates with profiles. Until one day we typed roommates.com in and realized somebody had built that site. And this was like 3 weeks or 4 weeks later. And I said, why the hell did anyone type that site in the first day? Because I just wasted 4 weeks. So we didn't know what to do. We went home for Christmas, and people are like, what are you working on? And I'm like, I didn't want to tell everyone in my family I was unemployed. So I said, I'm an entrepreneur. Of course, my mom said, you're actually unemployed. I said, no, I'm actually an entrepreneur. And that's also when I learned when you're starting out, the difference between unemployed and being an entrepreneur is in your head. It's usually a mindset. And I was, in my head, an entrepreneur. And they said, well, what are you entrepreneuring? And I'm like, because it wasn't really a common word there. And I said, well, I got this thing, air, bed, and breakfast. They're like, air, bed, and what? And we just started to get used to pitching it. We're like, maybe we should actually do this. And it was still not obvious. The original idea was air beds for conferences. So we ended up launching at South by Southwest in 2008. And the whole idea was if you're going to a conference, you don't have a lot of money, you could sleep in someone's home on their airbed. And we ended up with the second version of the website we built, and we had 2 customers, and I was one of them. So that's kind of how it started. And it wasn't the Facebook story, 2 weeks, it was a longer road. Yeah, the idea was that like airbed and breakfast was not the big idea. And we thought there was a big idea, and we didn't think it was that. We thought it would pay the rent. So we had enough time to think of the big idea. And we thought the big idea was some social networking something. Yep. And of course, it turned out that the crazy little idea that we thought no one else would do became the big idea. And I think there were a couple lessons there. Number one, all these really good ideas or big ideas often sound like stupid ideas. Somebody once told me in the early days, don't worry about anyone stealing your idea. If it's any good, everyone will dismiss it. And that was exactly the truth. And the second thing was that a lot of these ideas are you solving your own problem, and they're not like some life-changing problem. It's in a nuisance. And that was clearly the case for us.
So tell us a little bit about the early days. You really had to hustle to keep it going.
So we're one of the companies that launched a bunch of times. I actually learned something, like, because we kept doing launches to get a lot of press. If you launch and no one notices, you can actually just keep launching. And so we just kept launching. Like, we've launched, and like people would keep writing about it as if we launched. We're like, we'll just keep launching until we get customers. And we would change things and change the name, and we'd launch again. And so the first so-called launch was that first weekend, but that was just 3 people. The second launch was Airbeds and Conference United States, and we had 2 customers. I was one of them. And so we decided we'll launch at least one more time. When I used it in South by Southwest. At the time, there was no payments, and you had to stay in an airbed. And a bunch of people was telling me a bunch of things. They said, well, why do I have to, like, I want to go to London, but there's no conference. And we're like, why does this have to be for conferences? At the time, that wasn't even obvious. Like, why would anyone stay in anyone's home if there wasn't a conference? It would be too weird. And then we thought, wait, why does it have to be on airbeds? At the time, actually, we had a rule. You had to have an airbed, so you had to inflate an airbed and put it on your mattress. And everyone was like, why am I putting airbeds on my mattress? It's so uncomfortable. And I wake up on one side of the bed, and I woke up, and the other, it's like rolled around me, it's hot. And we're like, okay, fine, you don't need to have an air mattress. You may have a real bed. And the final thing was payments. We may very well be the first website on the internet where you could actually book with somebody else and pay them directly. In other words, there was eBay, and eBay used PayPal, but you didn't feel...
Before PayPal, there was checks.
There was, checks, exactly. And there wasn't a lot of legacy there, because we looked at, there was eBay and Etsy, and they were both before us, and Etsy used PayPal, and both of them you would book, and they would send you on a PayPal gateway, and we wanted to feel like booking a hotel. You never leave Airbnb. We would hold, collect, remit the money, and so, whereas they were like paying direct, and they would take a cut, and there was 2 different payments. So and that was kind of a crazy idea. It almost scared us. It seemed insane that like you would actually be able to pay somebody else and be able to book something with them, and you would get a reputation system. We decided, let's just do it. And at the time, we're like, this is a little too crazy. It's a little too scary. I don't know if we're allowed to do this. I'm not sure if it will work. We decided to do it anyway. And and so then in the summer of 2008, we ended up basically designing the final version of the product. So we designed this product where you could book someone's home anywhere in the world. We had a rule, 3 clicks to book it button, because there were so many clicks and so many different ways to get a home that it was just too hard. And I remember hearing the story of when Steve Jobs developed the iPod, no matter where he was in his iPod, he wanted to make sure he was always 3 clicks from a song. And we said, well, you should always be 3 clicks from a being able to have a paid booking. And so we created this basically a homepage with a search bar, listings, the home, and that's exactly the product as you see it today with reviews, payment system, and customer service. And we basically ended up landing on that. But that was the third version of the product. We kept basically redoing the product. At this point, I get introduced to a whole bunch of investors, probably 15 angel investors. We were raising $100,000 to $150,000 at a $1.5 million valuation. We were $1 million, and eventually someone convinced us we get $1.5 million valuation, an extra $50,000. So we were trying to sell 10% of the company for about $150,000. And of the 15 people we got introduced to, I think about, we got introduced over email. I think about 6, 7, or 8 of them didn't even reply to the email, so we never heard from them again. About 7 or 8 replied. Of those, half of them said this doesn't fit my investment thesis, which is weird because their investment thesis was like consumer internet companies. We were consumer internet, so I assumed that we fit their thesis, but we didn't. Or they said the market wasn't big enough. One person said, I'm just not excited about travel as a category. So we're like, okay. And then we ended up meeting a few more investors, and they all passed on us. The low point was we ended up launching in August 2008. We meet with the angel Mike Maples, and we decided, I was so cocky, I said, I'm not even bringing a deck. I'm just going to show him the live website. We launched that day on TechCrunch. We have 10,000 people visit our website. I go there without a deck. I have a website. I type in the website. It doesn't work. So I basically sat in front of him for like an hour, and I didn't know what to say. I'm trying to explain to him this concept, and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So, needless to say,
never told me that story.
Yeah, it was pretty embarrassing. And always have a deck, like as a backup if your website goes down, or at least don't let your website go down.
Yeah.
If you're meeting an investor and it's like the last money you have. So those binders that kids used to put baseball cards in those sleeves? We put credit cards in them. I probably went 30,000 in credit card debt. Like I would get credit cards, like a typical $5,000 max, and I would just keep getting credit cards. The company stopped giving me credit cards. And Joe did the same thing. And we went tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt. We ended up launching for the Democratic National Convention, though, and we were able to, 2008, what was like the number, we had this basic idea, we need to get people to talk about us, and we had this thing called the chicken and egg problem. How do you get guests come without homes? Well, you can't get homes if there's no guests, and how do you get them at the same time? And how do you do that on a travel website where you can't just focus on one city because people go to other cities, so you have to focus on cities all over the world at the same time. And basically, the thing we thought is we need to get a ton of press, so it's like the spontaneous combustion at the same time. And so we thought maybe events, higher profile versions of the founding event. And so we thought, what's a high profile event? And we thought the Democratic National Convention. Barack Obama was coming to Denver. There were 80,000 people coming, or there was an 80,000-seat football stadium, and they had 27,000 hotel rooms. We thought, wow, there's an opportunity here. Plus, it's very grassroots. And we contacted New York Times, CNN, and they thought, like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. No one's ever going to stay with other people. So we ended up just, like, reaching out to the local newspapers. They ignored us. And we had this idea. Why don't we just start by getting anyone to write about us? And we felt like if some people write about us, other people would refer to them. So we literally started with bloggers. I wouldn't be surprised if like some middle school student wrote about us for the school paper. But if we literally got like bloggers to write about us, then people would Google like DNC. They would see us come up because all these bloggers wrote about us. Then the local newspapers would write about us. And eventually we worked our way up until CNN, New York Times got it. It started getting traction, but we were still in debt. We got like 80 bookings or maybe less for the Democratic National Convention. We got 1 or 2 bookings for Republican National Convention. That did not work out too well. And then the following weekend, we got like no bookings. And we realized if only there were political conventions every week, we'd have a business. But we have nothing. So this is now almost a year into the business. We're tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt. Every investor said no to us. We've launched 3 times. We've gotten national press, and we have like almost no customers every single day. And now one of my co-founders decides he's moving to Boston. He's getting engaged, and his fiance is maybe not interested in living in the West Coast. And it was unclear if we were going to stay together as a founding team. And this was everyone hits rock bottom. For me, this was rock bottom. We're totally in debt. We don't know what to do. We're desperate. Late at night, it's midnight when you 1 in the morning, and Joe and I think maybe we're airbed and breakfast. The airbeds aren't working out. Maybe we could sell breakfast. I mean, everyone needs to eat. So we thought, let's just get in the breakfast business. So we ended up we weren't going to make eggs, so we decided let's make cereal. So we started making breakfast cereal. And we made presidential-themed breakfast cereal. We made a Barack Obama-themed cereal. We called it Obama O's, the breakfast of change. And we created Cat McCain themed cereal, or John McCain themed cereal. We called it Cat McCain's, a maverick in every bite. And we literally handcraft our own cereal boxes. And we basically used it to gin up press and also, frankly, desperation. And I hadn't been eating at this point, so I was probably also starting to get slightly delirious. But we called General Mills. They were like, "What are you talking about? You seriously think we're going to make unlicensed presidential themed cereal?" We're like, "Okay, I guess you won't." And so then we called these medium-sized cereal companies. They're like, "Great, just send us a non-refundable check for $200,000. And we're like, "Okay, that's not going to work." So we found this guy in Berkeley. He was a alumni of RISD. He says, "I can't print you 100,000 boxes of cereal, but here's what I'll do. I'll print you 1,000 boxes of cereal for free. Just give me a royalty." We're like, "Thank you." One day, Joe comes back with 1,000 pieces of giant cardboard. I'm like, "What the hell is that?" He's like, "This is cereal boxes." They were just pieces of cardboard we had to fold and glue into boxes. No one told me that. So to fund the company, we basically folded like giant origami 1,000 boxes of collectible breakfast cereal, had to pack cereal in them, and we sold them for $40 a box. We thought, who was going to pay $40 a box? But they were limited edition, so we hand-numbered every one. We called it limited edition. And we ended up selling like $30,000 of cereal. And that's actually how we funded the company. And now we have a core value. It's called be a serial entrepreneur, with cereal with a C. I know it's a bad joke, but and that's basically how we started. And this is the last part of the story. The last part of the story is, it was November 2008. We got back to almost broke. It's more than a year in. We've launched 3 times. We've been on the national press. We have only a couple customers a day. Everyone says this is crazy. I told one mentor of mine about this business. He said, "Brian, I hope that's not the only idea you're working on." My mom said, if you need money, you don't need to have strangers stay in your home. Let me send you money. So people are very worried. And you start wondering about the decisions you've made in life to get here. So I could tell you I didn't feel successful or smart or talented at this moment. I felt like the world was against me. I would go to sleep with my heart pounding every night. I'd wake up wide awake, what am I going to do? How am I going to get through the day? We have no money. And a bunch of people recommended we go into Y Combinator. And we were kind of well, we've already launched. We're way beyond that. They're like, "You're dying." And we're like, "Okay, I guess we're not beyond anything if we're dying." And so we meet with Paul Graham at Y Combinator, and he thought the idea was absolutely terrible. In fact, he said, "People are actually doing this?" And I said, "Yeah." And the second question was, "What's wrong with them?" And I said, "Oh, shit." So I thought this was a really bad interview. But by the end of the interview, Joe hands him a box of Obama O's. And Paul Graham thought we just bought this stupid box of cereal. And he's like, "No, this is how we funded the company." And Paul Graham said, "If you can convince people to pay $40 for a $4 box of cereal, maybe you can get strangers to stay in other strangers' homes." And he also liked us because he said we were cockroaches. And he said, "It's an investment, nuclear winter, and the only people that will survive are cockroaches, and you're a cockroach." And so I'm like, "Thank you." It was actually the nicest thing. For 6 months, that was the only compliment I got, was I was a cockroach. And I remember calling my mom, "Mom, I'm a cockroach. I got in." So that's how we got into Y Combinator, and that kind of was a turning point for us. Yep. There were 2 things. The first thing was what Y Combinator did was it basically created a structure for us to work on it full time and live together. So in other words, we were all kind of working on it, but it was everyone had other things going on in their life. And I think the enemy of a startup is everyone else's life. It's true. You have life, and you have vacations, and you have conferences, and you go away, and you do other stuff. And it's that is the enemy of a startup. Paul Graham used to say, "Startups don't die, they just fade away." And so, we basically decided for 3 months, Nate would move from Boston to San Francisco, and we'd wake up at 8 o'clock. We go to bed at midnight, 7 days a week, and we work from 8 to midnight every single day. And 7 days a week, we get full night's sleep, but that was it. And we would, in that dedication for 3 to 4 months, created this real serious rhythm where we weren't doing other things. We were totally focused. That was the first thing. I think the second thing was Paul Graham gave us a series of advice that probably changed our business forever. Probably the most important single piece of advice I got, which is probably advice that is probably the most important advice I can give you, or one of the most important advice, is he basically drew out this chart. And he basically said, it's better to have 100 people that love you, 100 customers that love you, than 1 million customers that just sort of like you. In other words, if you have 100 people that absolutely love your product, they'll tell 100 people, and then they'll tell 100 people, or even 10 people, and this thing will grow. We call it growing virally. In fact, almost all movements in history have grown this way as well. There's deeply passionate followers, and they grow it, and they're customer advocates. And the problem is in Silicon Valley, the general wisdom is, I need to build some app, this thing, and needs to have this viral coefficient. I need to get millions of people to use it, and they got to like it enough to share it. And that's totally the wrong way to think about it, especially if you're in a service business like ours. So Paul Graham said, all you have to do is get 100 people like you. Don't worry about millions of people. That was totally freeing. Because until then, I'm like, how the hell am I going to get a million people to do this if I can't even get my mom or my sister to do it? But I can find 100 people. And so we literally decided, do things that don't scale. If all you need to do is get 100 people to love you, do things that don't scale. It turns out 100 people that love you is really hard because it's easy 100 people to like you. 100 people to love you means you need to meet them. You need to understand their problem. And so we literally would fly during Y Combinator from Mountain View. We commuted from Mountain View to New York. Joe and I would go to New York, and we'd go door to door because New York was where most of our community was. We would meet with every one of our hosts, and we'd live with them. We literally would live with them. We'd write the first reviews for the places. And in fact, I would go there and I'd be like, wow, the photos are terrible. This is actually a really nice house. And the host was like, well, I can't figure out how to get photos onto my computer. This is before really the iPhone and high quality camera. This is just like people had to plug a camera into their laptop. And she thought, what if you just clicked a button and a photographer next day would magically show up and photograph your home? And they thought that'd be amazing. And so I went home with Joe and we borrowed a camera from one of our friends in Brooklyn, who was a photographer, and we knocked on the door. And they're like, hello, yes, I'm here, the photographer. And they're like, wow, this is a small company. The founder's also photographing my home. I used to also carry a bank ledger in my backpack, and if you need to get paid, I would just like rip out the check, and I'd knock on your door and hand you a check. So that was also a reminder of how small we were. But the point was that doing things that don't scale, if you just think about building something that even just one person loves, it's super easy to create something a single person loves, especially if it's a service. And then you go person by person. Once you have 100 people, then you just focus on figuring out how to scale that. And it's a totally different intellectual problem to scale something 100 people love than figure out what that is. And that was a turning point for us. And so by April 2009, we had hundreds of people that loved us. People started booking, and it became clear there was a real business here. And Paul Graham said you have to be ramen profitable by demo day. Demo day is the end of Y Combinator when everyone presents to investors. Well, he said, beginning of 2009, it wasn't clear to be any investors. Sequoia Capital had put out this slide deck, RIP Good Times. That was like the worst possible thing for me to see at the time. Like, what do you mean good times? Like, this last year's been the worst year of my life. What do you mean the good times are over? What's the next year going to be like? So, because it wasn't good the year before. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what this means. And what it meant was Paul Graham said there may be he actually told us this. He said, there may be no investors at demo day. Can you imagine that? At Y Combinator, there may be 0 investors at demo day. And so if you want to defer a batch, because there may be no investors, you can. And we decided, well, we can't defer. We're going to die. And so Paul Graham said, well, there might not be investors. So if you're profitable, you never need to get funding. And so we decided, let's be ramen profitable. Ramen profitable means you're profitable if you just live on ramen. And I'm like, well, that's more than I'm living on now. So that's totally fine. And so by April, we were ramen profitable, and Sequoia Capital invested $600,000. And at the time, that was like a pretty big deal to get Sequoia Capital to invest. They hadn't invested they invested in LinkedIn, but like they invested in Google, PayPal. So we're like, oh my God, like it was a huge legitimization event for us. And I think at that point, the rest was kind of, I don't want to say history because we're going to talk about what happened next, but that was a moment, at least the product market fit happened. And then it went from building a product to kind of building a company. The really unexpectedly great thing about our business was this word network effect, I think, gets kind of bastardized, and it's unclear if it means anything anymore because everyone says they're a network effect. But we truly were a network, and I'll tell you how it happened. So we launched in New York, or we didn't even launch. I mean, we launched anywhere that you could access the internet, basically, and there was Google Maps. But New York was the big city we launched in. The thing is that we were a travel product in New York, which meant, unlike other companies where the supply and demand, like Uber, the drivers and riders in New York. On Airbnb, the hosts were in New York, but the travelers came from all over the world. So people all over the world would hear about and discover homes in New York. They would travel to New York, and they'd also travel to San Francisco, and then they'd go back to their city, and they'd spread the idea. But the other thing is they would go from a guest to a host. And so the network naturally grew. But we also targeted events. So, we targeted the Democratic National Convention. We built D.C. through the inauguration in 2009. We focused on music festivals and concerts. So the World Cup, the Olympics, these are early, not the most recent one, but the one before. So events and PR were probably the main ways that we bootstrapped. And then we built this one-click post to Craigslist tool that Craigslist allows us to do until they shut it off like a couple years into it. But we allowed hosts to basically, we built a tool where they could, with a single click of a button, click and distribute their post to Craigslist to get more distribution. And so the listings would get relisted onto Craigslist, and then we feed back. We started doing a little bit of Google advertising. But the main way it grew was through word of mouth and PR. And PR we used to promote the events. We didn't have any partnerships. Like, we tried to partner with event companies. We tried to partner with, like, partnerships in your early stage company, I found never work because there's so much red tape and paper that by the time you ever get done, you're like dead. And so, but PR is super, like, if you've got an idea that's noteworthy, people will talk about it. And almost the more absurd the idea, in some ways the better, because it's worth writing about. Like, it was absurd people were doing this, so they couldn't stop writing about it. And so that was actually a good thing. Being kind of a provocative idea, it was good to get the word out. And then we thought, if we just get enough people to use it, they'll tell everyone else about it. And so this idea primarily grew through word of mouth. And then we would go to cities, and then we would educate the hosts. We'd do these meetups. So we go to a city, and we call it turning on a market. We would do a meetup. We meet the 10 or 20 hosts. We'd educate them. But the other thing is that in San Francisco or here at Stanford, it's not novel for you to meet somebody who started a website. That's like not a big deal, and you just had like 15 people come talk to you. You go to like Boston, you go to like Austin, Texas, you go to San Diego. And most people don't go through their day-to-day like meeting a person who built the product they've used. It's very novel. And if they like the product, they want to go meet that person. And so you're in town. So we literally went city by city. We went to Paris. We went to London. We'd meet the host. We'd educate them. And then one thing we didn't realize is they would get so excited they met us and they thought they were reasonably nice people that they would tell their friends about it. And their friends would start doing it. And they get more engaged. We noticed after you meet us, you would get more engaged. And then we'd also photograph your home, give you tips. And so these markets started turning on. And then we kept getting press. We kept having some funny Obama O's type stunt to get people to keep talking about it. And we just religiously like focused on making sure customers really loved us. And we felt like if you loved us, you would tell more of your friends. And eventually it would grow. On the internet, especially most marketplace businesses, the kind of paradigm is 5 stars, right? So a YouTube video, Airbnb or Uber or whatever, it's 5 stars. And the problem with 5 stars is 5 stars, like the only reason you would leave less than 5 stars is because it was horrible. So like if you rate like an Uber ride like 4 stars, like your life might have been in danger, right? And so like in other words, the bar to do 5 stars is really low. On Airbnb, the bar is like people actually do leave 4 and 3 star reviews, but our goal wasn't to get to a 5 star because a 5 star might have been nice enough for other people to book it, but we wanted to build a product where it was you loved it so much you would tell everyone about it. And it would have a meaningful impact on your life. And we believe that travel has the impact to transform your life. Like, I've taken trips and I've met people where it has an impact on your life, and we wanted to have that. And so we thought, what if you booked an Airbnb and we sold you a product and you didn't leave 5 stars, but you emailed the company asking for a 6 star because the product was so good you had to almost go above and beyond. And so we imagined, when we design products, we imagined, okay, this is what customers expect. They expect to have a 5-star experience. And then we basically ask the intellectual question. So let's take airport pickup, for example. What's a 5-star like check-in experience on Airbnb? The 5-star check-in experience is they give you the address, you get to the house, you knock on the door, and they're there. And they're open the door and they let you in the house. And that's 5-star. And anything worse than that, you start to leave like 4 stars as you call them. They're like 5 minutes away, and you'll probably leave a 4 star. And like 1 star is obviously like they never showed up. So the bar is kind of low. Like you knock on the door and they open the door. That's a really low bar. So we ask, well, what's a 6 star? Well, a 6 star is they probably pick you up at the airport. So you don't knock on their door; they actually pick you up at the airport. So what's a 7-star review? You can actually play. It's kind of fun. Well, 7 stars, they don't pick at the airport. They send a limousine, and you open the limousine door, and they know that you like, I don't know, Pringles. That was a weird example. This is like improv, so we're growing with it. So there's Pringles there, and there's like coconut water, and they know you are into surfing, and there's some surfing magazine. Even when you're in San Francisco, you're not going to surf. That's fine. And so that's a 7-star. So what's an 8-star pickup? Well, an 8-star check-in is, there's a you get to the airport and they're like we're coming, and they're like, where are you? And all of a sudden you see like a giant elephant, and an elephant is walking by the gate, the terminal, and there's a parade in your honor, and you get on top of the elephant, and you are paraded away. And you said, well, what's a 9-star check-in? If that's an 8-star check-in, how do we get to 9 stars? A 9-star check-in is you get off the plane, and you don't even, the moment you step off the plane, there are 5,000 screaming 13-year-old women and boys, and they're holding signs. I call it the Beatles check-in. It's the Beatles in 1964 coming to America, and they're just cheering for you, screaming for you, and they follow you, and they do a press conference in the front yard of your Airbnb. And so then what's a 10-star check-in? Well, I can go to 30, but I won't, because it'll be a long day. And the 10-star is you get to the airport, and there's a little card, and it's got your name on it, and you're like, great, there's my ride, but you realize the person dressed in the limo suit is Elon Musk, and he just takes you to space. And so I've exaggerated to make a point. Usually we don't go all the way to 10, but the whole point is that, like, if what you need to do is just find 100 people to love you, then it's very easy to take for granted that the 5-star is what people expect. But to build something people love, you almost need to do something more than they expect. And so, like, every moment is an opportunity to do something slightly more than people expect. And we play this out. You go to, like, all the way to 10. Okay, now we're not going to do all that, but maybe suddenly 6 stars doesn't seem so bad. Like, now we should have a service, airport pickup, or something like that. And so we do this about almost every frame of the experience. And this also can apply to almost anything, office design, or like how you hire people. Like, we storyboard end-to-end the interviewing experience. One time I told somebody about our product. In fact, there's this person who works for an executive at Disney. I'm like, yeah, we have a product team. And he thought, a product? He said, product, do you mean like the house? And at Airbnb, we've historically called the product like the website and the applications, the technology. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. See, at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg calls the product the website or the app. But technically speaking, the product is whatever the customer's buying. The customers are not buying our website, and they're not buying our application. That's just a storefront and communication. What they're buying is a house. And frankly, what they're buying more than a house is the host experience of hospitality, this idea of belonging. And so we realized very early on that we are an online to offline business. In fact, in China, they call it O to O, online to offline. But we kind of started, I don't know if you could, I think the sharing economy, we're kind of like a next wave of the internet. So there was a wave of the internet, things online, Amazon, books online. There was another wave of internet, connecting together, LinkedIn, Facebook. But then there's another wave of the internet going back into the real world. And Airbnb was one of those examples. And so we started storyboarding the experience and realizing it's really about every moment of the experience. And we have to be responsible, not just for the online part of the product, but the offline part of the product. And so that's what we did. Steve Jobs used to say, design isn't how something looks, it's how something works. And I think when you realize design's how something works, you imagine almost everything needs thought and design. That you don't just design a website or an application, you design everything. You design a company, and you design your organization, you design your buildings, everything. And so we started thinking, once you realize everything can be designed, then you don't have to pull everything out of a box and plug it in. In other words, your company doesn't need to look like every other company. Everything could be reinvented. Now, not everything should be reinvented. You shouldn't reinvent management and HR systems. But there are some basic things that might be core to you should reinvent. And for us, we decided the space we work in should be reinvented. First of all, our core competency was showing cool space around the world. We better have a cool space. And I also realized early on that a really cool, interesting space would be a huge differentiator to hire people, and that you would spend more time in your office than you will in your home. And so it was deeply important that people were comfortable and happy. And so that was the kind of hypothesis, and I think it's pretty much a no-brainer, but I think that it's a moment that people completely take for granted. It's totally an afterthought. And I said, that's great that it's an afterthought for everyone else. It's going to be a competitive advantage for us. And one of the things we decided was, how can we reinvent the office? I mean, there were like 100 ideas, but I'll just give you one of them. In one of the offices we had, you walk in the lobby, and there were photos of our homes around the world. And so you go to this lobby, and I remember people were like just walking around the lobby, looking at all these homes. They're like, oh, these are awesome. And I thought, I couldn't figure it out, but I thought, there's got to be a better way than just showing photos of our homes. And I couldn't figure it out. One day, I'm walking home. I'm walking from my house to, I'm walking down the street. And I pass a furniture store, and it's late at night. and the furniture store is like lit up. They light it up at night, and it's like and there's a floor to ceiling window. And I just look in, and it's a showroom. They basically recreated these rooms, and it was hilarious. I thought it'd be really funny just to have a meeting in a showroom. And in fact, the next day I took somebody to a meeting in the showroom, and we were hanging out in a dining room of like a furniture store. But you feel like you're in a living room. It was actually kind of fun. It was kind of absurd. You're like having a meeting in IKEA, but it was actually kind of fun. And suddenly we realized, what if all of our meeting rooms were actually modeled piece by piece after apartments on our website? And we ended up doing that. And so I remember one time we emailed somebody. We said, hey, do you mind if we recreate your home in our office? And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, all I need is an inventory of everything in your home. And so some people did it, and we literally recreated the rooms. So you go there, our meeting rooms are literally homes you walk into, like showrooms of our homes. It's a subtle little reinvention. It doesn't cost a lot of money because people's homes, the furniture they put in is actually cheaper than most office furniture. It's really creative, and we have tens of thousands of people a year who fly or come to our office to tour our office now. And our office has become a huge competitive advantage in hiring, and people like to stay over. But that's just like a tiny example where almost everything is a creative opportunity. It's so critical that there's no dissonance between what's inside the building and what's outside the building. And I remember I've been to some companies before. Like one time I went to this travel company's travel magazine, and I imagined their office being this awesome place, and I don't know what I imagined, but I got there, it was gray, it was drop ceilings, cubicles, and you could have put any logo in the front, and it could have been literally any company. And I thought, people need to be in the mindset of your product. And so you have to put your product in the building. People need to be immersed in the world because they're working in that world. And so when they work for you, there's kind of like they're working in the center of the universe. The center of the universe of your business needs to be the most potent. And the problem is in most companies, it's the least potent. It's like just gray with drop ceilings and cubicles. And so I thought that was a huge opportunity to reinvent. And we've now had a lot of like CEOs and other people come to our office to get inspiration. Even as of last night, I was showing somebody around. I did it out of kind of necessity, but so here's the thing. When we started Airbnb, we started in our 3-bedroom apartment, and we started working on the apartment. And unlike most companies, when they start hiring, they find an office space. And we decided we were going to work out of our apartment indefinitely. In fact, originally we were inspired by Craigslist, who works in a house. We thought maybe we can put 100 people in a house. We didn't do that, thankfully. But we started working, and we hired people so quickly we couldn't find an office in time. At one point, we had, I think, 15 or 17 people working out of a 3-bedroom apartment. We literally had meetings in the bathroom and on like the stairwell. It was kind of odd. You know, you should, by the way, never interview someone in the bathroom. It's apparently like a huge violation. At some point, like we had no space. So we turned our bedrooms into meeting rooms. And I said, I'm just going to give my bedroom over to the company. You guys can turn it into a meeting room, and I'll find a place to stay. And my first instinct was, well, where do I go? Like, we never built that roommates site, so I'll go to roommates.com. I'll go to Craigslist. And then, I don't know, for some reason I thought, wait a second. Why the hell will I go on Craigslist? We have like thousands of homes here in San Francisco. Maybe I can rent one for the month or a couple months. And then I thought, wait a second, why don't I just, actually it'd be kind of fun if I stayed in them for a few nights each and I actually could test them. And I could travel without leaving my city. And so I ended up doing this, I thought for a few weeks, turned into a few months, turned into almost a year. I think it was like 10 or 11 months, where I would stay in a different home every like 3 to 5 nights. People are like, where are you from? I'm like, 3 blocks away. And they're like, wait a second, what's going on right now? But it was this huge message of the company. And the message of the company was, this is not a job. This is not even a career. This is a calling. This is a passion. And I think a strong culture is when people believe and feel in what you're doing. And they're not, there's this old parable about 2 men, they're laying bricks. A guy comes up to one man, he goes, what are you building? He goes, I'm building a wall. He asks the other person, what are you building? He goes, I'm building a cathedral. I think Simon Sinek wrote about it. But it's the idea that you're not building financial systems, you're not building a website, you're not designing, you're not designing different screens and mock-ups. You're building this mission. You're creating this kind of world. And that's only possible if you're constantly using the product. And even if you're a travel company, you can be living and breathing the product. And I always felt like Every one of us has to be a product person. You can't be a business person. You're a product person first and foremost. And product needs a rule, and the product is the thing you're selling. And so we need to be deeply passionate, all of us, about everything that we're doing with the product. And it really told people in the company, you should use the product when you travel. You should use product when you're home. You should be hosting, and you should become an expert in every part of your product. And the number of people I see that work at some big companies where they are so disconnected from the end customer, those are the companies that get disrupted. Culture, first of all, like culture I define as like a shared way of doing things. And so that's it. And I think I don't think there's necessarily good and bad cultures. I mean, you could argue there are cultures that are bad. That's usually subjective. I think there's weak cultures and strong cultures. And what I consider a bad culture, sometimes might consider a good culture. It's just that's the way they do things. And I wanted to have a strong culture, a culture where everyone was on a mission, it was shared, and people were deeply passionate, and there was a set way that certain things were done. And there were like a series of beliefs that we all had, and there were a few governing ideas. And so I decided we wanted to have a strong culture. We ended up touring Zappos. Alfred Lynn's on our board. He ran Zappos with Tony Hsieh. And we did a lot of research. And one thing I learned is, a strong culture is a place where it's a founder-led culture, and it's where the founders really impose this kind of strong, like, kind of way of doing things that people buy into, and they're deeply passionate about being there. And again, it's not a job. Weak cultures, it's lame to hang out with your coworkers. Strong cultures, it's totally natural. And so the first thing I realized is the most important cultural event is every time you hire somebody. When you're starting a company, the most important cultural decisions you make are the people you surround yourself with. The second most important is deciding when people aren't fits, removing them. And there's 100 other cultures, but I think hiring is the most important thing to culture because you're bringing people in. And so the culture becomes the people around you. And so the main thing is the hiring. I decided to interview every single person, which is not crazy when you're 5 employees, but I think I interviewed the first few hundred employees. I don't know what the number, but I remember like people were begging me to stop interviewing employees. And about a year after that point, they started begging. I actually did stop interviewing every employee. But I literally would interview every employee. And today, when you interview Airbnb, you have to go through like functional or technical interviews. So if you're an engineer, you go through engineering interviews or functional interviews. But you also have to go through culture interviews. And everyone goes through 2. We have 2 people because sometimes, you make the wrong decisions. So we have 2 people. And the people are basically testing for like 6 core values. I'll give you like one example. One of our core values is to be a host. So they're passionate about the notion of giving and hospitality. And you can kind of tell by their life and their background if they are or not passionate about it. It's deeply hard to not be a host in your DNA and want to work at Airbnb and be successful. It kind of is a weird thing. So you get to learn these things. So these are just some of the things. We created a core values council. It almost sounds like an absurd thing to say at most companies. I don't know anyone else that really does that kind of stuff. Core values council, it's about 12 people that are experts in the values and the culture, and they're kind of this kind of advisor group to everyone in the company. So people aren't sure if this is the way to do something or not, or I don't know if this is something that feels on brand or not. You can kind of book office hours with these people, and they can give you some feedback. And, so this is kind of some of the stuff we do. We try not to be overly dogmatic about culture. Like, I think it can go too far where there's like a set way of doing things you can never reinvent. So things have to be timeless and more fundamental, not like, this is how we make presentations. That's not culture. Culture are like beliefs that should never change under any technological conditions. You have to basically be relentlessly doing cultural things every week. And so I do as many cultural things as I used to do, but now they're no longer person to person. The main leverage points I have now, culture, is having people do things on my behalf. You would call it leverage. They're doing it for you. So in the early days, I did all the interviews. Then I trained people. I handpicked people, and I said, you should do the interviews, and here's who you interview for. So I spent days with them showing them how to interview. So then they started interviewing. Then we had all these people, so I had to create an inner circle that trained those people. I used to meet every single employee and give them a personal orientation. Then I started doing weekly orientations to groups of people. And now we recorded it all because we hired people all over the world. And so we've institutionalized this whole onboarding week and we curate all the videos and stories. I do the Sunday night email series. I think you've seen some of the emails. Every Sunday night, I write an email to the company that's not really a tactical email, but like a more like kind of above the trees, kind of fairly thought-provoking kind of cultural email. Because I find that if on your first day you say something to somebody, they kind of remember, but then like 100 people said 100 things after that. So you have to continue to repeat things. So I think culture is about repetition. It's about repeating over and over and over again the things that really matter at a company. And then it's about trying to design as many things, like the space. When you check in, there's a key card, and when you check your key card above, it says champion the mission. It's one of the values, which is like, and it reminds you every day to do that. So there's a lot of subtle things that we do. And I think it's like that touch point. Like, what is every moment that can be designed to reinforce how you want like people to value things? And it all can be designed. I think culture, some people I've heard, when I wrote this blog post, it was based on what Peter Thiel said, called Don't Fuck Up the Culture. Because I asked Peter Thiel's advice, and he said, don't fuck up the culture. And I'm like, oh, how does that happen? But the way you don't fuck up the culture is by focusing on it and designing it. I've heard people giving it a counterpoint. There's devil's advocate, which is to say cultures are organic. They shouldn't be designed. And when they're designed, they're like fake and sloppy. And I actually don't believe that, because most people who've created cultures organically wake up with a culture they don't usually love. Now, it doesn't mean you control everything they do. The whole point of culture is you control only a few things, like everyone here is a host. And I'm not going to tell you how to act, but I'm going to tell you everyone here has to be hospitable. And that I'm going to impose on everyone. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. So you pick just a few things. You can't pick like everything, because then you're like Big Brother. Hiring and then management of the people that you hired. And that starting in like mid 2008 until today, that probably became and is sustained to be the most important thing. And when you're just starting, other than picking the right co-founders, which is also kind of like the most important thing, it ceases to be important. So before product market fit, other than your co-founders, I find the people around you weren't the most important, because you and your co-founders presumably can do most of the work, and it's just really on you to figure out almost everything. And so I found before product market fit, I did everything. And I literally did everything but code. I did everything. And then post product market fit, you do very little except manage, create a vision, and hire people. And so suddenly you shift, and you go from building the product to building the company that builds the product. Well, the company is mostly the people. And so I had to figure out how to find great people, attract them, recruit them. And then the craziest thing is once you hire these people, like, what do I do now? I got to manage them. How do you manage somebody? Like, what does that even mean? I'd never been managed or managed somebody in my life. I mean, I worked at a company before, but in hindsight, I don't think I was managed very closely. It was a small firm, but I kind of did my thing. So I didn't. And I managed. I was like a camp counselor, like at a hockey camp. That wasn't really management. They were like 12-year-olds, and I'd tell them how to skate. That wasn't really management. So I'm like, oh God, I don't really know what management is. So. And you're managing people older than you, and that's also kind of weird, like, oh my God. And so at first, it's a really odd experience. And so you kind of learn partially through trial and error by like making tons of mistakes, like a classic management mistake is like people complain, so you immediately appease them. So you basically reward people to complain, and the people who don't complain like get disenfranchised, but they're not extroverted, so they just leave the company. Like there's just these little things that are kind of, in hindsight, intuitive, but they seem counterintuitive. And so I had to learn. I think learning to hire and manage was one really big thing. I think learning how to move towards from an intuition to data informed, because I think when you're starting and building a product, I think data is not the most important thing. I know people do a lot of A/B tests to try to figure out a product. I really feel like pre-product market fit data is not the most important thing. And it wasn't for us. I mean, we were really going off of person-to-person interactions. And then you have to work on moving towards data information. So obviously A/B testing and cohorting and all these things that were completely foreign to me. Saying data, kind of building people, thinking more long-term. When you're a startup before product market fit, thinking long-term seems preposterous because there may not be a long-term. It's kind of like if you're dying, you're not thinking about what you want to do when you grow up. You're going to think about how do I not die, and like how do I plug this wound. So you kind of move out of this terminal. You start thinking more terminal. I think those are probably some of the big things. But there were other things like actually having a plan, a roadmap, a strategy. Like you don't have plans in a startup. You don't have strategies. You don't have roadmaps. Roadmaps the next 2 weeks. And suddenly, well, I've got 3 engineers. They got to know what to do for the next 3 months. And so you start creating roadmaps. You start having a wish list. How am I going to get the word out? How am I going to expand? So things like that. There's this perception that when you start a company, you grow a company. See, everyone, when they ask me at Airbnb, they always ask me about the founding days. It's as if like you have this idea, it takes off, then you just got to find a way to manage it. And the truth is that so glosses over like all the other stages. Like you have like 5 stages. Stages 2, 3, 4, and 5 are as complicated or more complicated as stage 1. I mean, I think stage 1 is actually fairly straightforward. Like solve your own problem, do something that don't scale, find 100 people that love it, and have some really great co-founders that you trust. Make sure you are full stack designers and engineers in your founding team, ideally. And I mean, there's just some basic principles. I don't think it's that complicated, and even if it is, it's well written about. But the thing after that, there's like not a lot of books about, and everyone gives you the wrong advice, and you got to figure it out, and you're kind of on your own. And the risk is, if I ask a CEO how to manage, and they work at a huge company, they're going to tell me the wrong things. It's like you talk about like you're like skating, but it's not ice, it's water. It's like the ice skates don't work yet. So we invited a CEO over, and he gave me this piece of advice I never forget. He said, every 6 months you keep your job, it's a promotion. I almost think in hindsight, it's better to say every 6 months is a totally different job. So it's not like this metaphor of you're an athlete and you're like, I don't know, you're like a tennis player and you like play small tournaments and you work your way up. You start playing tennis, then you're like a bowler, then you're like a football player, and then you're playing hockey. Like the job changes so much, you're almost playing a different sport every job. And this is why it's fairly, I don't know if it's rare, but it's hard to start a company, to be the right person to start a company, and be the right person to manage it when it's 1,000 people. Because it means you have to be different types of people. And it's totally different. Like at a large company, you have to be extremely strong at you usually have to be fairly strong at public speaking or writing, because that becomes your primary management tool. Like, how do I speak to the company? I either write them an email or I say something in a video or in front of a bunch of people. In the early stage, you're around a kitchen table and it's 4 people. So your interactions are different. There's all these subtle things that like the skill sets start changing. The most important thing, I think, is being adaptable, because no one's an expert at everything. But you got to be very adaptable. And I've seen people who've been able to scale and people who haven't been able to scale. And I think there's 2 things that I've identified as being able to scale. One is just general intelligence and talent. Like, if you are like over your head when you start, it's hard to ever not be over your head. But the other thing is people who are kind of curious and adaptable. I found that Pablo Picasso had a saying. He said, it took me 4 years to learn to paint like Raphael, but it took me a lifetime to learn to paint like a child. We have to kind of be kids at heart in startups, I find, in the sense that you're curious, you're open-minded, you're welcoming, you're adventurous, you're not a know-it-all. Know-it-alls will never scale in startups. So if somebody's a know-it-all, they know everything, so they'll never know more. So you're not going to scale. That's kind of the way I think about it. So these are the things, and I've had to be that, and I've sought out your advice. And if you're not a know-it-all, you are shameless about getting feedback. And so I've had to surround myself with people much smarter than me, much more experienced than me, including Reed and many other people who've gone through what I haven't gone through yet. But you're right. It's not even like you're slaying a different dragon. It's like a different sport. There's like a bunch of stages of startup. The first stage is, I think, survival, meaning like you're not meant to survive. So you start this company, you have this idea, and everyone's telling you you're crazy. You can't get any money. You can't raise any money. You're co-founders. You don't even know if everyone's going to keep working on it. And so I call that like survival. And like not dying is working on it the next day. It's like no one actually kills you. You just fade away. You stop working on it. The second stage is probably like firefighting. And so then you like are firefighting. Oh my God, we're growing. I need to hire these people. I don't know what to do. And then once you get through the survival and some of the initial firefighting, you've gained the luxury of having all these other people now decide to copy you and try to destroy you. So it's existential threats, true existential threats. And we had 2. One was government relations, and the other was competitors. And I'll talk about competitors. So we got to the point where we started getting successful, only to have all these people basically copy us. One day, it was early 2011, so about 2 years in from 2009 of it working. So 2009, 2010, it kind of was working. 2011, so we had 2-year kind of honeymoon, or I don't know if I'll call it honeymoon, but like, and then suddenly, by the way, in 2010, somebody, this guy, Howard Hartenbaum, he's an investor at August Capital. He told me, he says, whatever you do, all you gotta make sure is these 2 brothers don't copy your website. And I said, what 2 brothers? He goes, they're called the Samwer brothers, and they're notorious, and usually when they copy a website, they scale it and they kill you. And he's like, don't worry though, because you're fine, because they haven't copied your website, and they probably, if they haven't by now, they won't. I'm like, thank God, we're free. All of a sudden, we notice a lot of suspicious activity and people spamming our users, and we're like, something's up. We didn't know what's up. Turns out, we find out the Samwer brothers have their eye on Airbnb. Now, I'll tell you how scary this was. In 2011, the hottest startup in the world was Groupon. They went from $0 to I think like $1 billion in revenue in like a year or two. At the time, that was completely unheard of. Actually, still kind of unheard of. And Groupon grew that fast, not because of the U.S. business, but because of the European business, which was called City Deal. That was actually the Oliver Samwer clone that Groupon had to buy. So basically, these two brothers, not only I was told would kill anyone that they cloned, they're like the attack of the clones, but they also had built what was, at least being positioned at the time, the fastest growing, most successful startup of all time. That was how Groupon was positioned. That was not somebody that we were interested in, like, fighting, right? Suddenly, like, you're like, this giant dragon appears, and you're like, this is not possible to beat him. And now at this point, we'd raised $7 million, in fact, from you. So, and
this is where I enter in the picture.
So Reed had give us $7 million, and then suddenly, in 2010, I think, in April 2010, by January or February or March, some point 2011, they raised $90 million. And we had 40 employees, and it took us 2.5 years to find these 40 people. And in 30 days, they hired 400 people, and they opened 20 offices. And I had no idea how you even open a second office. Like we have one office. How do I get a second office? Do I fly there? Do I like get an apartment? And they had $90 million, and I was like, this is horrible. And they basically said, we're going to do in Europe what you did in the United States. Now, the problem with that is most companies, if they lose Europe, they're just a smaller company. In Airbnb, if you lose Europe, there is no Airbnb. A travel website where you can't travel to Europe is like a phone without email or phone without signal. There's no reason for it to exist. So this became a bet the company fight, and we didn't know what to do. We had a proposition to buy the company. It would have been very expensive, but more importantly, it would have been huge cost culturally. And I didn't know what to do. I remember I called up Mark Zuckerberg because they cloned Facebook, this StudiVZ. So I called up Andrew Mason. Andrew Mason told me, yeah, they're probably going to kill you. He had told me a story that Oliver Samwer was so good at copying companies that it was too easy for him. He needed to turn it into a challenge. So he decided to hire developers from North Korea. And because I don't know, and Andrew described it as because it was like he just wanted to make it more challenging to copy his companies because it's too easy. I don't really believe that story, but it was just there's all this mythology. Mark Zuckerberg told me, don't let them sell. Whoever has the best product wins, and he ended up being right. Paul Graham gave me even better advice though. He said, you're missionaries, they're mercenaries, and oftentimes missionaries often win. So he said, you should basically just pretend like they had this baby, but they don't want to raise the baby. And so I thought, well, we're founders. We want to grow this company. So I'm like a parent, and I want this child to like grow into this wonderful company. And so I said, Wayne, say this to Oliver Samwer, but my view was my biggest punishment, my biggest revenge on you is I'm going to make you run this company long term. So you had the baby, now you got to raise the child, and you're stuck with it for 18 years. And because I knew he wanted to sell the company, I'm like, no, you're running this company. And I knew he maybe could go move faster than me for a year, but he wasn't going to keep doing it. And so that was our strategy, and we built a company long term. And the ultimate way we won is we had a better community. He couldn't understand community, and I think we had a better product. But it was a do or die time. And we ended up flying to Europe. We hired a bunch of country managers. We flew them all to San Francisco, and we basically trained them for a month or two. We said, now go to your country, hire your team. Here's how you open a market. Here's how you open cities. And we opened, I think, like 8 or 10 offices in like 3 months. It was actually totally insane. We hired hundreds of people, and the whole speed of the company picked up at that point. And a couple years later, obviously, it was game over. But the first moment was Y Combinator, where we had this hustle of, if we weren't successful by the end of Y Combinator, we're probably going to stop, so we hustled. And then we started moving, but we weren't moving as fast. Then 2011, boom. Samwer, the gift he gave us was to scale fast. And he took a company that was kind of successful, and he kind of compressed our time to becoming an international network effect within a year. And by the end of 2011, it was clear it was going to grow really fast.